Nobody tells you what it feels like to become a guest in your own home. There is no word for it that I know of. It does not arrive with a bang or a confrontation or a door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. It arrives the way November does in Macon, Georgia, with a chill that settles in before you realize the warm weather is truly gone. Standing in my own kitchen on a Tuesday in October, I watched a woman I had known for 8 months rearrange the cabinet above the stove without asking. She moved Carol's good mixing bowls to the back and put her own things in front. She did it the way people do things they believe are already theirs. That was 6 weeks before Thanksgiving. 6 weeks before my son Nathan stood at the head of my dining room table with a wine glass raised and told a room full of people that he had finally found his family. I sat at the far end of that table and held my glass and did not say a word. I did not need to. The property tax bill sitting on the kitchen counter said everything that needed saying. 38 years I worked for the United States Postal Service. Started as a carrier in the summer of 1981, walking routes through the same Macon neighborhoods I had grown up in, delivering other people's news, other people's bills, other people's letters from sons and daughters who had moved away and still bothered to write. By the end, I was a distribution supervisor with 42 people under my direction and a retirement party in the break room with a sheet cake that said 38 years of service in blue icing that tasted better than it looked. Not a man who needed a fancy life. A reliable one was enough. Carol was the most reliable thing I ever found. We met at a church picnic in the summer of 1979. She was sitting under a tree eating potato salad and reading a paperback at the same time, which told me everything I needed to know about her in 30 seconds. We were married the following spring. We bought the house on Birchwood Lane in 1984 for $61,000, which was about $12,000 more than we could comfortably afford and exactly the right decision. 3 bedrooms, a deep front porch, a backyard with a pecan tree that dropped more pecans than 2 people could ever use, and that Carol turned into pies every November without fail. Nathan grew up in that house. He learned to drive in that driveway, or rather he learned to steer while I sat in the passenger seat trying to stay calm. He broke a window in the garage playing baseball when he was 11 and told me it was already cracked, which was not true but showed imagination. He graduated from high school on that front porch in his cap and gown because the school held ceremonies outside that year and we had the best yard on the block. He left for Savannah for work when he was 24 and I stood on that same porch and watched his taillights disappear down Birchwood Lane and went inside and told Carol the house felt too big. She said it always had been. She meant it as a comfort. She was right. Carol passed 4 years ago this past March. A stroke, fast, no long warning. She was here on a Wednesday and gone by Thursday morning, which the doctor said was in some ways a mercy and which I have spent 4 years deciding how to feel about. Some mornings I still expect to hear her in the kitchen. The house does not forget people the way we sometimes wish it would. It holds on to them in small ways. The creak of a hinge at the same pitch she always said needed fixing. The light through the kitchen window at 4 in the afternoon exactly as she used to love it. After the funeral, Nathan came down from Savannah and stayed 2 weeks, which was the right thing to do. He called every Sunday after that for about 8 months, which was also right. Then the calls became every other Sunday. Then twice a month. Then occasionally. No complaints from me. Grief changes people's schedules in ways they do not always notice themselves, and I had enough to fill my own days not keeping score. A work conference in Atlanta, 14 months after Carol died, was where he met Diane. He called to tell me about her on a Sunday evening with an energy in his voice I had not heard in a while, and it made me glad, genuinely glad, the way a parent is glad when a child sounds like themselves again. He brought her to Macon to meet me the following spring. Pleasant woman. Organized. 2 grown children from a previous marriage, a son named Cooper and a daughter named Melissa. She shook my hand firmly and complimented the house and asked if the pecan tree in the backyard produced well. I said it did. She smiled like someone filing information away. Noted. But I told myself I was reading too much into a handshake and a question about pecans. Some things you want to be wrong about. For a while I worked very hard at being wrong about Diane. Nathan and Diane married the following October. Small ceremony, nothing elaborate, a restaurant in Savannah with about 30 people. Sitting in the front row, I watched my son get married for the second time and felt the complicated thing that fathers feel at those moments, which is joy and loss at the same time with no clean way to separate them. I gave a short toast. I meant every word of it. That Sunday night, I drove back to Macon, walked into the house on Birchwood Lane, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat on the back porch listening to the pecan tree move in the wind. The first change came before they even moved in. Diane suggested the house might be easier for everyone if Nathan and she were closer by, and since their Savannah lease was ending anyway, perhaps it made sense to stay in Macon for a while. Nathan called to ask how I felt about it. I said the house had 3 bedrooms, and I was only using one. He said they would not stay long, just until they found their own place. Just temporarily. Temporarily. That word. 71 years have taught me that words are almost never accurate. What it usually means is until something changes, and what changes is rarely the thing you were hoping for. They arrived on a Friday in September with a moving van that seemed too large for a temporary arrangement. Cooper came to help carry boxes. Melissa came the following weekend and rearranged the living room furniture while I was at church, which I discovered when I came home and could not find my reading chair. It had been moved to the corner near the window where the light is not good for reading. I moved it back. Nobody said anything about that, but the look Diane gave the chair's position the next morning told me the conversation had not actually ended. Within 6 weeks, the house felt different. Not dramatically. Like a familiar song played in the wrong key, everything almost right and slightly off at the same time. Carol's things began disappearing from the spaces they had occupied for decades. Not all at once. One object at a time. The ceramic rooster from the kitchen windowsill went first. Then the quilt on the couch her mother had made. Then Carol's photographs on the hallway bookshelf got moved to make room for Diane's framed prints. I found the photographs in a cardboard box in the hall closet and put them back on the shelf that same afternoon, not a word to anyone. Around that time, asking my opinion stopped being part of Nathan's routine. Not in a hostile way. In the way that happens when a man has a new person in his life whose opinion he has started to prefer. I understood the mechanics of it. I did not have to enjoy it. Around that time, I started calling Pastor Wendell more often. Wendell had been my friend since 1987, had presided over Carol's funeral, and had the particular gift of listening without immediately trying to fix whatever he heard. We had coffee on Wednesday mornings at a diner on Riverside Drive, and I told him what was happening in pieces, not because I was afraid to say it all at once, but because I was still making sense of it myself. Wendell listened to all of it, and then said something I wrote down later because I did not want to forget it. He said, sometimes the people who move into your life fill every available space until you cannot remember what the air felt like before them. I thought about that for a long time. I am still thinking about it. What made it harder was that Nathan was not a cruel man. The truth is more complicated than a simple villain story. Distracted, which is different from cruel, and distraction in a good man can do almost as much damage as cruelty in a bad one because it is so much harder to name. He loved me. That I believe without reservation. But love without attention is just an intention, and intentions do not put Carol's photographs back on the shelf. Watching him that fall was like watching someone you raised who is becoming someone you do not entirely recognize. Not because he had changed at his core, because he had handed the steering wheel to someone else and stopped checking where the car was going. Every conversation about the house carried Diane's framing. Every suggestion about the future had her fingerprints on it, even when her name was not attached. He had borrowed her perspective so completely that I could barely find his own underneath it. Blaming her for filling the space never crossed my mind. People fill available space. That is what people do. What I kept returning to was the question of who had made the space available and why. Nathan had opened every door. He had set Carol's things aside. He had stopped asking my opinion. He had brought up equity and real estate as though they were neutral topics rather than conversations about the place where his mother had spent 30 years of her life. He had done all of that himself, slowly, with no single moment dramatic enough to push back against. That was the most difficult part of all. By November, I had made a decision. No confrontation, no ultimatums, no speeches, no sitting anyone down for a difficult conversation they could prepare for. I was going to handle it the way I had handled every serious problem in 38 years of postal work, methodically, one correct step at a time, and I was going to wait for the right moment to let the truth do what truth does when you give it enough room. Then Nathan mentioned the mortgage, or rather, the absence of one. Casually, over dinner one evening in October, he noted that a house like this, paid off and in good condition, had a lot of untapped value. He had been building toward it for a while. Equity. Opportunity. A friend of Diane's in real estate had apparently mentioned the market in this part of Macon was very strong right now. Just thinking out loud. His thinking, I told him, I appreciated. What I was thinking I kept to myself. By that point I had learned to keep those two things separate. Stay with this channel, because what happened on Thanksgiving evening is something I have thought about every single day since. Subscribe so you do not miss it. Thanksgiving that year fell on the 28th of November. I remember the exact date because I had circled it on the kitchen calendar in red, the same way Carol used to circle important days, and because what happened that evening is the kind of thing that attaches itself to a specific date and does not let go. Diane cooked most of the meal, which I had no objection to. A competent cook, and I was not going to argue with a well-made sweet potato casserole on principle. Cooper came with his girlfriend. Melissa came alone. Nathan's co-worker and his wife drove up from Warner Robins. 8 people total at a table that Carol and I had bought at an estate sale in 1991 and refinished ourselves in the garage over a long weekend while Nathan was at summer camp. My seat was at the end nearest the kitchen, not the head. Somehow, over the course of 10 weeks, I had drifted to the far end of my own table the way furniture drifts to the walls when no one is paying attention. Around 7 o'clock, after the main plates were cleared and before the pie came out, Nathan stood up. He picked up his wine glass. The table went quiet. Gratitude came first. Change and new beginnings and what it meant to build something worth keeping came after. He looked at Diane. He looked at Cooper. He looked at Melissa. He looked at his co-worker. He looked at the co-worker's wife. He did not look at me. Not once in the whole toast. I counted. Not when he talked about family. Not when he said he was grateful for the people around this table. Not when he said that this past year had shown him what a real home felt like. Holding my glass, I looked at the centerpiece Diane had arranged from branches in the backyard, branches from the pecan tree Carol had loved, set in a vase Carol had never owned, and I thought about a great many things very quickly. 1984. $61,000 and a 30-year mortgage paid off in 25. The property tax bill that had arrived 3 days earlier, addressed to Roy Dempsey, which was my name and nobody else's. The deed was filed at the Bibb County Courthouse with my signature and Carol's signature and no other names anywhere on it. The conversation Nathan had started about equity and opportunity and a friend of Diane's in real estate. Then I set my glass down, picked up my fork, and waited for the pie. Cooper asked me to pass the cranberry sauce. I passed it. Melissa made a remark about the sweet potato casserole that made everyone laugh. Nathan poured more wine. The evening moved forward the way evenings do when they have not yet caught up to what happened inside them. Nobody at that table knew what I was thinking. That was exactly how I wanted it. 71 years have taught me that the moment of understanding does not always have to happen at the moment of the wound. Sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do is absorb what has happened, stay steady, and then take his time deciding what comes next. Hot reactions close doors. Cold clarity opens them. 38 years of sorting things into the right order does not stop being useful the day you retire. Good pie. Carol's recipe, which I had given Diane when she asked for it in October, not because I trusted what she would do with it, but because it was Carol's recipe and it deserved to be made right regardless of who was making it. I ate 2 pieces, said goodnight to everyone at a reasonable hour, went to bed, and lay in the dark thinking about Monday morning. Some things do not need to be said at the dinner table. Some things are better handled on a Monday morning with a phone call to the right person. That Monday, I called Patricia Aldean, who had handled Carol's estate and who knew every document connected to the property on Birchwood Lane going back to the original purchase. She listened to everything and did not interrupt once, which was one of the things I had always valued about her. When I finished, she asked 2 questions. Was Nathan's name anywhere on the deed? No. Had I signed anything in the past 14 months that I did not fully understand? No. She said good. Then she told me what she was going to prepare. By Wednesday afternoon, the house on Birchwood Lane was in a living trust. My name is Granter, an independent trustee. No transfer of property possible without my written authorization while I remained living and competent. If I ever became genuinely unable to manage my affairs, that determination would require 2 independent medical evaluations and would pass management to the trustee, not to any family member with a personal financial interest. Patricia also sent a letter to the real estate agent Diane's friend had apparently already contacted, a contact I had not known about until Patricia mentioned it. The agent had been sent preliminary information about the property. Patricia's letter was short, explaining the ownership structure clearly and noting that no listing agreement could be executed without authorization from the trust. She copied me on it. I read it twice and filed it in the drawer where I kept the important things. The listing inquiry was gone by the end of that same week. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, Nathan called on a Saturday morning with a tone I had not heard from him since he was a teenager caught in something he could not talk his way out of. He asked if we could talk. I said of course. He drove down and sat at the kitchen table, Carol's table, and looked at his hands for a moment before he looked at me. Did you put the house in a trust? He asked. Yes, I told him. Why? I told him to get my coffee first, because that conversation deserved to start right. Up he got, poured the coffee, and sat back down. Then I told him everything I have just told you, in the same order, without raising my voice, because there was no reason to raise it. The facts did not need volume. They had their own weight. After I finished, I waited. Nathan was quiet for a long time. Not the defensive quiet of a man building a counter-argument. The heavy quiet of a man hearing something he already knew and had been hoping not to have confirmed. He looked at the window. He looked at the table. He looked at the corner of the kitchen where Carol's ceramic rooster used to sit before it disappeared into a moving box. Are you angry? He asked. Not angry, I told him. Tired. Tired in the specific way that comes from watching someone you raised from nothing slowly stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a situation to be managed. That landed the way true things land. No fanfare, just wait. His apology came without a list of explanations attached, without reasons offered to soften it. Just sorry, on its own, the kind of apology that means something because it is not asking for anything in return. He had let things move in a direction he should have stopped earlier. Diane was not a bad person, and I believed that, but he had handed her too much space in a house that was not hers to fill and had not noticed what was disappearing until I was the one pointing at the empty shelves. Whether there was a way forward, that was his next question. There is always a way forward, I told him. That was not the question. The question was whether the way forward looked like a conversation or whether it looked like what the last 3 months had looked like, which was a series of decisions made around me rather than with me. Diane moved most of her things to a storage unit over the following 3 weeks. Not everything. Not immediately. But enough that the house began to breathe differently again. Carol's photographs went back on the bookshelf. The ceramic rooster came out of the box in the garage and returned to the kitchen windowsill where it belonged. The reading chair went back to its corner, the one with the good light. On a Sunday in January, Nathan came by with no agenda. No real estate conversations, no equity discussions, no careful suggestions about what might be practical for a man my age. He brought coffee from the place on Forsyth Street that I have always liked and that he used to bring me years ago before life got complicated. We sat on the back porch under the pecan tree and talked about nothing important for 2 hours. Best Sunday I had had in a year. A man's home is not a transaction waiting to happen. It is not an asset to be optimized or a situation to be managed or a problem to be solved on behalf of someone else who thinks they know better. It is the place where he has lived his life, and the walls remember things that nobody else does, and the light through the kitchen window means something that cannot be appraised or listed or transferred without something important being lost forever. You do not get to raise a glass to your new beginning in a room your father paid for and forget whose name is on the deed. And if you forget long enough, the deed will remind you. They always do. If any part of this story touched something real in you, leave a comment and tell me about a time you had to remind someone what still belonged to you. Those stories matter more than people realize. And if you want more stories about dignity, patience, and the kind of strength that never needs to announce itself, stay right here. There is more to come, and I am not finished yet.